Today we'll be discussing comedian Bill Burr's latest special, Drop Dead Years, and then we'll be discussing sudden cardiac death. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr. Asif Doja, and this is the Doctor of Laughs.
Not a real doctor.
Ali Hassan. Every episode I pick a topic for Ali from comedy to entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic from medicine and health and grills me on that topic. Now, today we'll be discussing comedian Bill Burr's latest special, Drop Dead Years. And we'll be discussing sudden cardiac death, because that's his implication about the Drop Dead Years. He says that at the beginning of his special.
He, of course, is alive.
Yes.
He's very alive. Possibly, some may argue, healthier than ever.
Some may argue. I mean, he's certainly doing a lot to get his life kind of in order, which is good. Mm-hmm. He was talking about this age 49 to 61, where he had a friend who just died, and you're like, it's true. And we do hear about this. And so I thought that would be a good thing to talk about in the second half, is like what happens when these people like suddenly drop dead. It's quite obviously devastating for families, when this happens. And so I thought we would talk about that. But first, we'll talk about Bill Burr. But even before that, Ali, I got something to get off my chest, my friend. So, as you know, I was in France recently, right? And as Ali also knows, and people who listen to this podcast may also know, I like restaurants.
Not speaking French, restaurants.
Right.
Yes.
I tried. So I made notes about all the restaurants I went to. It was like 25 restaurants over the course of a month. It was crazy. So, and some of them are just like, you grab like a little pastry here, or you grab a gelato, let's say every day or every other day,
Sure.
So,
but still quite good, like remarkably, noticeably great.
Amazing.
Yeah, okay.
And Ali and I have talked about this offline, but the fact that the ultra processed foods, which we've done an episode on, just doesn't exist there, and you eat chips there, like a bag of chips. They're not as good because they're not made to be addictive. They just have potatoes and salt and that's it, so, and even their pastries, like everything is good. The butter is amazing. I'm not a butter guy. Ali's more of a butter guy.
Such a butter guy. Who says I'm not a butter guy?
I'm not a butter guy.
What kind of
like
monster
butter.
is not a butter guy?
I know. I don't really like butter, but it's amazing there. I mean, one of my friends even brought some back. So here's what happened. So I listed a bunch of things, and I'm going to pull up what I wrote just so I'm getting it correct. So I said there was a brasserie, which is kind of like, like a pub kind of like place, just down the street from me, like, 5 minutes, called Brasserie Rosie. So I hadn't gone there, and I was getting close to the end of my trip. I'm like, I'll go there for lunch. Excellent. Great food. And this is what I wrote. Brasserie Rosie, excellent brasserie with a younger crowd, classic French staples. That's it. And then I went on to the next one, right? Some guy, like this is, and it's on Reddit, I posted this. This is probably my first mistake. Like, so most people are like, oh, that's great. This is great advice. Really interested. Oh, where'd you stay in Bastille? Because we're thinking about going there. Was it noisy? People asking for advice, because it's Paris Travel Guide is where I posted this. And I can post a link if people want in the show notes. This is what the guy writes. Or girl, I don't know. Thanks. Not sure if the significance of the younger crowd remark. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, I'll just kind of do this as like a, I said, I'm old, laughing emoji with the tears coming out.
Yes.
Okay. That's, I think, the correct response. Okay, but are you saying that only younger people will feel comfortable in these places for some reason? And I said, no, I didn't say that. And then he's like, so what are you saying? I assume there's something significant in it, or you wouldn't have mentioned it. And I'm like, listen, for God's sakes, I'm trying to just do a nice thing and tell people about these great restaurants that I went to in a great city in the world. And this guy, like, why does everything have to devolve into some like troll argument? I also mentioned another place which is filled with lots of students and tourists, but he didn't, or she didn't take an exception to that. I'm just like, what a loser. Like, I'm stating a fact. I know my age, and I know that I'm older than everybody else who was there. Any judgment you put on that is you, not me. I'm stating a fact.
This is such a perfect segue into Bill Burr's comedy. I can't believe it. I think this is just such a natural thing. Did you leave it at that in the end?
I blocked him.
Okay.
I blocked him. Okay. The thing these people want you to do is engage with him, like keeps arguing. And then other writers said, I think that's relevant and helpful. I'm in my 60s, but I kind of want to go to a restaurant, which is a bit of a cool factor and is a little more lively. So I want to go to a place that older people go. So that's helpful. It's just more diverse. Another person says, like, I feel self-conscious when I go somewhere and I'm not the same as, the crowd isn't the same as me. And younger people sometimes want to go to a younger place. And I'm under 40 and I don't mind, but some people do mind. So I think it's useful. Like, and the person says, it's not a bad or a good thing. It's just how it is. I'm like, yeah exactly. Because you people are rational human beings. Like, just the whole idea of like getting into these conversations just to argue with people. Like, what the hell? People not have time for this? Like, or do people have too much time? I guess is what I'm saying. Like, I don't know. I'm just flustered here, man.
You're flustered, man. I can see that. I think, it would do you well to remember something I learned many decades ago when I was in sales, where my boss told me 1 out of 10 people that you deal with will be a complete jerk, an unreasonable asshole. And he goes, it's not bad, right? 1 out of 10, 10%, not bad. However, some days you'll meet 3.
Right.
That's the problem.
It's not every exact 10th one. Yeah,
exactly. But then you'll go a few days without meeting one. And then, so I just always put that in my head. And certainly some days you feel like, especially if you're on the road, you're like, has everyone lost their mind today? What is happening? You get the feeling, but then you forget but I also drove 15 times in a row without incident, without any issues. So I think, especially on the internet, it's worth your while to be like 1 out of 10 people. And I think, right? Like, imagine there was 5 people who came and were like, what does that mean? Why are you saying that? What does that mean, young? There was no other reason you like analyzing your words. I think if it's one guy and people came to your defense, life's still pretty good.
And I will tell people, blocking and muting people is a really good thing, because again, these people want to engage. The worst thing that can happen to these people who like leave these comments is nobody comments. And just ignore what's going on. At least on Reddit, you can downvote things, so that also happens sometimes. So enough about that. And as you said, maybe we'll use that as a perfect segue into Bill Burr. Okay, Ali, so Bill Burr had a new special we were just talking about, Drop Dead Years, came out a couple months ago. And he's also on Broadway in Glengarry Glen Ross. We'll talk about that as well. So I thought it would be a good time to talk about Bill Burr. We'll do a bit of background, and then Ali and I, again, as we do with these things, we're not going to go, just chronologically in terms of his life. We'll just pick up some interesting things that we find interesting.
Interesting things that we find interesting? How interesting. Also, I should say, Asif, that this guy, Bill Burr, has been one of my top 3 comedians for decades. And I could probably do a 90-minute episode just on Bill Burr. So this is, I'm cheating myself. I'm cheating those who love comedy. But like so many things in comedy, Bill Burr himself deserves some context. So I think, because if you just went right now, let's say you went to the NPR Fresh Air interview that he just did in March, you'd be like, this guy's got problems. But there's an evolution of Bill Burr. There's an evolution of this person's comedy, of his views, of his view of himself, and an evolution of his career where he's gotten to the acting that is so it's been so fascinating and amazing to watch. I once, just to give you an idea of who Bill Burr is to me, I saw him at the Comedy Works many years ago, which was my home club in Montreal where I started doing comedy. And he's sitting downstairs at the bar underneath the Comedy Works, and he's watching hockey. Hockey is on. And I remember that he's from Boston. He's a Boston fan. I'm very much a Montreal Canadiens fan. And I see him and I love his comedy. This is going back about 15 years. It all happened within about 4 seconds. I decided to just walk past him and go upstairs. It was the old don't meet your heroes. I didn't know how it was going to go, because he's very like spirited and can come across as aggressive. And I was like, I don't want to get in an argument and then not like, I just loved his comedy far too much to ruin it in any way. And that's a very rare thing for me. Often I'll chat with people. Sometimes I'll say something dumb, but more often it'll just be a good chat. But with Bill Burr, I was like, can't risk it. can't risk it. So that's who this guy is to me, just as a, yeah.
There we go. And that NPR interview, Fresh Air with Terry Gross, is a really good interview. I would suggest listening to the extended version. They have a bit more info in there, and they argue a bit on it. And I think Terry Gross
more than you'll hear Terry Gross argue with anybody.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that. Bill Burr is not upset at all by the...
He loves to debate.
Yeah, so we'll get into that. So, but his background, he was born in Canton, Massachusetts. He's the son of a nurse and a dentist, and his father does come up a lot, not necessarily in his stand-up, a little bit, but in a lot of these interviews that he's been doing as of late.
Absolutely. I just learned that his father was a dentist in the last few months. Blew my mind.
Me too.
I just didn't think.
I thought he was a blue-collar guy, right? Like you'd see from the way he talks.
I'm going to share a story that Bill Burr shared on Conan many years ago. Conan and Bill Burr became very good friends, both redheads from Massachusetts, both, share this kinship. So, and of course, both extremely funny and have respect for each other. So Conan would have Bill Burr on his show often. Bill Burr told this story about, and this is sort of the lens through which I saw his father for years. He tells this story about they're driving on this, like I guess a freeway, in Massachusetts somewhere. It's the whole family. I think it's like 4 kids in the back or 3 in the back, 1 in the front between the parents, right? It's the 1970s. His brother from the back sees a McDonald's on the other side of the highway. And he goes, McDonald's, McDonald's. And then all the kids, McDonald's, McDonald's. They're all chanting McDonald's. Father makes a little U-turn, right? It's probably like a 2-lane high U-turn. Heads into the McDonald's. They're all cheering. They're like, yeah. He goes to the drive-thru, rolls down his window opens. They go, yeah. He goes, coffee, black. Pays for the coffee, takes off. I mean, I've told that story many times. You've laughed. Many people, as you can imagine, have been horrified.
Yeah.
What kind of... I thought it was the funniest thing. I don't strive to be that father by any means, but I just love that those men existed, right? I'm going to shut you up. I'm going to teach you all a lesson right now. So anyway, that doesn't say dentist to me. I don't know what that says. Yeah. Mill worker. I don't know. A guy who's very disappointed, but there's something big in there too. Dentists also have been notoriously unhappy with their lives.
That's true. A lot of substance abuse in the dental profession. That's kind of well documented.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is interesting, and we might as well get into this now. Bill Burr, as of late, has talked more about abuse that he suffered as a child. He mentions it in his stand-up special. Now, he doesn't go into detail of exactly what abuse, and Terry Gross does try to, probably more than most other interviews that I've read or seen with him, try to delve into that a bit more, but he basically says, it's all the abuses. Like, it just named the abuses, and that was probably what has gone on. And he's kind of trying to deal with that now. And he kind of reflects that a lot of his anger in his stand-up, which we're about to talk about, and in his life, and I can relate not to the abuse, but I can relate to Bill Burr is the type of guy who, just how Jerry Seinfeld does the observational comedy, about the mundane things in life. Bill Burr does that, but from kind of a ranty anger point of view, and like gets annoyed at these common things in life. But he says the really big things in his life, his family, his kids, the really big things he doesn't get upset about. He's very calm about.
Just as you get into that, Asif, I should mention a little shout out to the city of Boston, which punches way above its weight. People talk about, New York and LA, of course, when they're talking about comedy in the US. Boston is insane, man. If you look at the number of comedians from either, Boston or surrounding areas, look at the different styles of comedy here. Mike Birbiglia, Joe Rogan, Gary Gulman, Louis C.K. You've got like these angrier guys people may not know, the Steve Sweeney's and the other guy. Steve Carell, not a stand-up, but comes from that area. Nick DiPaolo, who is like now a complete lunatic, but the Rachel Dratches of the world too, Jen Kirkman's, Jason Mantzoukas, who you probably know is an actor. Like there's something happening in the Boston area. Dana Gould is also a big name. BJ Novak, one of the creators of The Office. Obviously Conan himself. I talked to Paula Poundstone. I mean, it's pretty insane. And I'm not even really scratching the surface. Doug Stanhope, really, really something happening in Boston. And there's a documentary called When Stand-Up Stood Out that I would recommend to people who are comedy fans about comedy in Boston. But yeah, many of them have left Boston. Few stayed behind. I guess the less ambitious of them, perhaps, or whatever. But yeah, he's one of that crop of Bostonian comedians. I said the angry guy, the name just came to me, Dennis Leary, not by any stretch of the imagination a comedian that I would, pay any money to see, but definitely like what a crazy, eclectic group of people with so many different styles, and something's going on there.
Yeah. And so he started there and then very quickly moved to New York City and was getting his name built up in the stand-up world. He became a regular on Chappelle's show on Comedy Central. And, he was, again, making his way up, becoming known. He started dabbling in acting a bit with Chappelle's show. But then something happened in 2006, which I've only read about, and I didn't really know anything about this. He does this rant on stage in Philadelphia. This was part of Opie and Anthony's traveling virus comedy. Opie and Anthony, these, morning DJs in the States who have syndicated shows and, very popular.
Yeah. I mean, well, they don't exist anymore. I think Anthony got
canceled,
dismissed. I mean, yeah, that's one of the correct cancellations. You can say what you want about cancel culture. Anthony definitely deserved to be put out to pasture, I would say. But yeah, Opie still exists, I believe.
So what happened in this rant?
You're asking me.
I'm asking you.
Well, the comedians who went on before him were friends of Bill Burr's, and I think, his loyalty to his friends is also something to behold. He felt like he's part of this amazing comedy tour, and this was just Philly on steroids. All the worst things that you hear about Philadelphia, like the sports fans and the testosterone fueled, Philly vibe, if you know about that, that was on full display. So he went on stage angry and defensive right out of the gate. And I think he had like a 12 or 15 minute set that he was supposed to do. He drops his set and just starts insulting Philly, just going in on everything that Philly loves, their sandwiches, Rocky, anything. It's really something to behold. You watched it recently.
Yeah, right? I can only get through like 2 or 3 minutes of it.
What?
Like, oh my gosh. It's just
they are booing him. Yeah. He is just, and at one point, I can't remember what the timing was. He looks at his watch. He goes, 6 more minutes. Like he was, this is like his stubbornness and determination on display. Like, I'm going to stay on here for every single minute that I'm supposed to, and I'm going to continue insulting you. If there was ever a time that somebody was going to get something thrown at them from the audience, it was definitely that time. But he just went off. And by the end, not the entire audience, but he definitely earned the respect of some of them. Because he stuck in there, which is, I don't know, a Philly thing to do. Mm-hmm. He did his time, stand-up guy, did what he was supposed to do, and went toe-to-toe with a hostile audience. And those people in the audience who knew they were hostile, who were very aware of how they were being, would definitely have respect for that. So I think a chunk of the crowd even gave him a standing O. But he regards that as a very unprofessional moment. And other people, students of comedy, would call that a watershed moment in comedy history. Yeah. So it's very interesting. He's not particularly proud of it, but it's a special thing to view as a fan of comedy, or as a performer of comedy. What would you have done in that moment?
Is it the type of thing that you, as a comedian, you wish you could do, and he actually did it?
I would say so. The part that I wish I could do most is keep all those things. 12 minutes of insults against the city. Like, imagine you asked me to insult Ottawa, which I wouldn't. I'm a fan of the city, but I think I could go for 3. And I've been to Ottawa 100 times. So I have to pick, and your stupid bike lanes and your Tulip Festival sucks and and blah, blah, blah. I mean, the Rideau Canal, that sounds like fun. People are going to, what a great way to drown in the winter. Blah, like, I don't know, where 3 minutes tops. The fact that he had all that, he must have been thinking about it backstage as he's stewing. But it's also his genius on display. The amount of stuff that he has, just up there that he can access. it will never stop being impressive to me.
So he, after this, starts a podcast in 2007. So he's one of the early adopters of podcasts, the Bill Burr's Monday Morning Podcast. Now, I haven't listened to it, but have you, Ali, listened to it?
I was a subscriber for a long time. Okay. It's so funny, you say he's an early subscriber. He used to do an hour, and I'd be like, this is too much. He's doing an hour. I gotta do other things. And then the Joe Rogans of the world came along and made an hour seem like nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But no, Bill Burr, it was good. It was interesting. It was just him. And part of you was like, is he going to have a guest, or is that? No, just him pretty much 95% of the time. He might have had like a call-in guest here and there.
His wife was on it for a bit.
His wife was on it.
As much anymore. But.
I did get to know her a little bit through that. Yeah, exactly. Because she would just come in the room sometimes, and there she is, the beautiful Nia. He would just kind of mock her, but tease her, and it became like mockery because he's got an audience of hundreds of thousands of people listening to him tease her. So it was, I got to know her a little bit. And you do wonder, if you know about Bill Burr, you're like, who is this angelic human being who can put up with this man? And I think he himself is very grateful for.
Yeah, and he's admitted to that as well. She's kind of an angel for putting up with him. So he then eventually gets an animated sitcom on Netflix called F is for Family. Again, I've not seen this either. Ali, have you seen this? And
of course I have.
Kind of based on, he says the dad who he plays is kind of based on his dad and kind of dads in his neighborhood growing up in Massachusetts, right? He's kind of, again, not necessarily blue collar, but that kind of blue collar attitude.
Yeah, and you've jumped ahead quite a bit. And as we said, we're not going in chronological order, but he has this famous quote. I think it was him and Greg Giraldo, or one of his contemporaries, would always talk about this idea of killing in obscurity. For 20 years, they would go on stage, they would kill, they were figuring out their own voice, people loved them, they would level every room they were going into, and then nothing would happen. So killing in obscurity, nobody knew about them. So I think by the time the podcast came out, he was already, it was such a smart thing to do that let me stay in touch with these people who I continuously, do well with, and I'm getting this small fan base. Let me grow it. And I think it's one of the greatest things he could have done. Then, that's 2007 when he started the podcast. 2015, F is for Family came out. And I think it was at this could be studied a little bit more in depth, but culturally speaking, it does sort of line up time-wise with an increase of sort of outrage culture, and cancel culture is starting, and people are right. And I think Bill Burr talks about a few places. There's a particular, I won't name the club in New York. You can look that up. I don't want to out them because I've met the owners of this club who are lovely people. But he talks about this club in New York. He said, I've had the worst sets of my life here. There was a period of time where it felt like people weren't coming to laugh, but they were coming to be offended. Like they were just waiting. And that's why it reminds me of your Reddit, your new friend on Reddit, who just looking for something to be offended by, or, well, what did you mean by that? You must have meant something by that kind of attitude. He said in New York at this particular club, that's what it felt like. It's like, what are you people doing here? You're clearly not here to laugh. You're like, oh, what's this guy going to say now? And you already have preconceived notions. So I think lining up with that, 2015, he made this show. I'm sure it was very, very satisfying for him to do it. He also talked about this very interesting thing. He's got a great cast. Like Sam Rockwell is in F is for Family. A bunch of people who you look them up and you'll see oh, I know this person. I know this person. He's got a great cast. But he talked about how, because he hadn't done a ton of acting yet. He had not done much acting. Yes, the Dave Chappelle show and all, but otherwise, he said, these actors would come in and they're delivering the lines and it's flat and it's half-hearted. And you're like, what's going on here? Does this guy not want to be here? And then they would do it again and they do it again. And then by the fifth time, they have completely become this character. And you go, I remember him saying this. I think he said it on his podcast. He said, oh, They were just taking a few laps around the track. They were just stretching. They were getting warmed up. He goes, I'm a comedian. I don't have any process.
Right,
I just come in and like, okay, this is what I got to do. Okay, I'll just do it. And I related to that more than I've ever related to anything, because when people talk about process, I don't have any training where I can just be, weekend acting seminars, a couple of weeks here, a one-off. That's not training. But there are people, and acting is very much this. You won't always need the tools. You won't always need them. But when you need them to get from, whatever, A to Z, as far as your emotion goes, as far as your range, as far as embracing character, you have this complete skill set that you've learned in your 3 years in a conservatory or wherever. That's where it becomes very useful. Comedians generally don't have that.
In fact, he says that in an interview that I read, or maybe is the one I heard on NPR. He says that he's got into acting because obviously, a lot of comedians transition to acting, but he saw a lot of his friends, get offered a TV show or a movie or something, and they sucked because they didn't know how to act. So he started taking acting lessons early because he didn't want to have an opportunity and then have no idea what he was doing. So, so kind of saying the same things you did, but he says when he was starting off acting, and this is in a GQ article I'll link to, that like the problem is he had red hair. And if you look at him now, he's bald, but he had like a full head of red hair back in the day. And he's like, nobody wants to hire a redheaded person. It's like Eric Stoltz or David Caruso back in the day. That was it.
Sure. They had these rugged, handsome, good looks to go with their redheadedness. Yeah. Whereas he had like thinning red hair and a non-imposing figure. And
So I think it was either him or his wife who said, the best thing that happened to you is going bald, And so I think his wife was saying like she was happy when bald, and then as soon as he grew in a beard, she's like, yes, this is it. This is what she likes. And this is, and then of course, it led to these roles. So he was in a couple things. He was in a couple episodes of The Mandalorian.
I struggled with that. I've never struggled with anything Bill Burr has ever done. I struggle to separate comedian, one of my favorites, from that and the Mandalorian role. I could never, like sometimes you're like, hey, it's that guy. And then over time you forget that it's that guy and now you're just in it. I never could separate it. That's a me problem.
Yeah, I was going to say that's because you're a super fan. What happens is I watch it, and then afterwards, I'm reading something about the episode, and then, I'll read an article, and they're like, this character, Miggs Mayfield, in this episode of The Mandalorian, in brackets, Bill Burr. I'm like, that was Bill Burr?
That's hilarious.
And same thing, he played Patrick Kuby, normally referred to as Kuby in Breaking Bad, was kind of a henchman for Saul Goodman. Again,
didn't watch
I had
enough
no
Breaking
idea.
Bad
You
okay.
didn't know that. And so, again, I never really noticed that. He plays, I think, JFK in Jerry Seinfeld's movie Unfrosted, and I didn't recognize him either in that. I'm like, he's pretty, for me, he kind of blends in and does these things. He made his own film kind of about his own life called Old Dads, because, his kids, I think right now are 5 and 7 or something like that, and he's in his mid-50s, so he's an old dad. As Ollie is too.
We're the same age. What the? Why?
I know, but your youngest son is younger than my youngest daughter. See?
True story. True story.
But we're still not as bad as some of our friends who have little toddlers and they're older than us. Those
idiots.
Guys. Oh my God.
Idiots.
Man. Anyway, that's a whole other episode for another day. But Old Dads, I never saw this movie. Did you see it? And what did you think of it?
What are you doing with your life? How did you not? I've seen Old Dads twice, man. I don't even know why I saw it the second time, but I enjoyed it. And I like the inspiration for it is so clear, right? If you are a guy in your late 40s with young kids, it is a whole different world out there. And in this NPR interview, he suggests, like when they went, he said, oh, the jungle gym. And somebody was like, actually, we call it the structure. And he was like, why? What's wrong with the word jungle gym? Is it jungle? Is it somehow racist? Is it, you know what I mean? So these changes, that's one of many, many changes. We don't do this anymore. We don't do that anymore. And he talks about like, this is children-led. We do children-led education here, which is complete nonsense to many people, but certainly to people who are like, I thought the teacher teaches because they're an adult. And that's why, I thought that we relied on adults to do smart things, not kids because they're maniacs. But the motivation for the show is very, very understandable, relatable in many ways. And it's like an incredible cast. Those 3 dads are very, very good at what they do.
In terms of acting, then, the most recent thing which we talked about is he's on Broadway right now in a revival of David Mamet's Glengarry Glen Ross. Now, he's in this play with Kieran Culkin, who just won an Oscar, Bob Odenkirk from Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Michael McKean, who we know from many things, including Better Call Saul, Spinal Tap, many things. And I guess what happened was Nathan Lane was originally supposed to be in the play, but he had, for a different role, had to drop out. But when he was approached, Nathan Lane said, okay, listen, you want to have an all-star cast? The first person you need to cast is Bill Burr, saying he's the number one comedian in America, and he's a good actor, and he sounds like a David Mamet character. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've read and seen lots of David Mamet stuff, Ali. Like, David Mamet, you have to... There's a skill involved in reading Mamet dialogue, and if you don't do it, it sounds ridiculous and brutal. And that kind of like stopping and starting and interrupting and pausing, like there's a flow to it. As soon as I read this quote from Nathan Lane, I'm like, oh yeah, I bet Bill Burr kills this. And apparently everyone is saying he's the best actor in this play, which is crazy because he's in with powerhouses, right? And then they say he steals the show. He's perfect in it. I don't know. I kind of makes me really want to go. Some of my friends just went down and saw it in New York City. I'd love to go see it.
You know, he got the Pulitzer Prize for this. Glengarry Glen Ross, David Mamet did in 1984. Mm-hmm. It's been revived again in the early 2000s, revived again. And I would go see this too. I would go see.
Yeah,
this.
I think maybe a lot of people have seen the movie. I mean, I really like it. I like the play. I like the movie, and so anyway, okay. Me and Ali go do a road trip down.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah. So much for elbows up, huh? One play.
Oh, yeah, sorry,
we're back to the U.S. baby.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. My friends just went to the U.S. Now I think it was for my friend's daughter's graduation, so
we'll give them a pass.
Yeah,
will we?
Probably already planned. So I guess, Ali, we should probably segue into talking about his stand-up style. And you alluded to this before in terms of, you talked about this with the animated series, how it's kind of a reaction to political correctness. And Bill Burr has this very interesting take on comedy, political correctness, etc., where he basically says that liberals think he's a Trumper and Trumpers think he's woke. And he finds that hilarious because he is just criticizing, especially the hypocrisy of everyone, not just liberals, not just right-wingers.
I love it. I love it. And I can see it. I can see how on either side you would be lulled into a sense of, oh, one of ours. Yeah, he's one of ours. And then before you know it, you're being ripped to shreds by this guy. You're like, what? But I thought he said he didn't like what? And I love it. I love it. He exposes, not just the hypocrisies, but the inconsistencies of people in general, and exposes the flaws of just, humans and human nature. And, if you scratch beyond the surface of what he's doing, it's really something. Like, not everybody can appreciate that. No. They're just sort of hearing the comedy, on the surface, which is amazing. There is depth to what he does. And when he does these interviews, you hear about like, yeah, I do that joke because it's a commentary on this. And you go, what? Oh my God. And, I'm not always smart enough to know what the commentary is, but I am aware enough to know, like, I'm enjoying this on more than one level. There's something more here than just a surface joke. And sometimes I'm not able to articulate what that is. So I do love these interviews after I've seen his specials.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think a lot of, there's a lot that's been made in the press about right-wing kind of comedians, whatever you want to call them. And a lot of time when they're making fun of the left, it's actually not funny. And so the reason why Bill Burr is funny is because he's talking about truisms and things that just no one is calling out, but are actually true. So, for example, in his stand-up special, the most recent one, Drop Dead Years, he talks about how we want to ban, the liberals are like canceling, people because of woke culture on the internet. They're doing all these things, but the KKK still exists. You could still get a membership to the KKK. And he compares it to like people don't drive in the high occupancy vehicle lane. They're too afraid to do that. But yeah, no, the KKK is still around. Like what is going on? Like why are we arguing about these minor ridiculous things or trying to cancel comedians when there's actual horrible things going on and organizations like the KKK? And when you think about it, it's like, yeah, he's right?
He'll often do something like that, which you just won't hear many comedians who have the type and style of comedy he does talk about. Like he'll just offhanded remark like, okay, yeah, they're poisoning the water supply, but yeah, definitely let's argue about this little menial thing, right? And you go, wait, poisoning the water supply?
Exactly.
How many people would probably look that up and like, what is this about the poisoning the water supply, right? And he'll talk about, he was very vocal about Luigi Mangione killing that United CEO. He's like, yeah, maybe a couple more of them got to go. So these guys stop operating the way they do and this kind of stuff. Like a lot of people aren't going to say that.
Exactly. And to be fair, he's always said this. This isn't not something new. Like he's felt this way for years. Same thing about Elon Musk. He hates Elon Musk. He hates these tech bros. And what he gets angry about is not just the tech bros, but the fact that the American public is not standing up to these people and realizing what they're doing. He talks about ultra processed foods like we just talked about in the previous episode. I think his joke is like, yeah, they're like, we like heroin. We like the addiction. Let's do that. Let's do that, but with food. Yeah, let's do that, right? And it is true. And so he's outraged that the general public is not more outraged.
Yeah, about the right things.
About the right things, yeah, I agree. He talks about how, yeah, no COVID vaccine, I don't want that in my body, but Ozempic, well, that's a shot I could.
Yeah,
he's like, people are ridiculous, right? And so he kind of gets upset about this. And as we were talking about, he bases this, or he has now come to realize that this is due to a lot of things he grew up with and some of the abuse he suffered in terms of him, A, doing these rants, but B, also his needing to feel loved and belonged. And that's actually, now he can admit that's why he got into stand-up comedy, right? So he said, growing up without love, he didn't want to have relationships, but yet he wanted this connection with the audience. And so, Ali, I want to ask you this quote that he says. I wrote it down. I texted Ali, I'm like, we got to talk about this on the podcast. He says, you can't be happy and be funny. He doesn't agree with this, but this quote is what's often said amongst comedians. What do you think of that quote? I'm very curious what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I remember Patton Oswalt saying this too, the person who shows up to the green room. Hey, man, how's it going? Man, it's so good. I'm in love. I met a woman. Other comics would be like, shut up, you idiot. Like, that's just the comedic way. This is the biggest, I've talked about this, the biggest difference with the sketch performers and improvisers. Those are happier people. They're well balanced, and not always, but in general, they're supportive, encouraging human beings. That's not really what stand-up comedy attracts. It does attract misery, and in the misery you find comedy. And certainly some of the best comedy that I've done is just complaining about typically my family, and the way it resonates, you go, my God, okay, I was here honestly just complaining to get off some stuff off my chest, but this really resonated somehow.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, I've known you for a while, since I was born, actually. So you're not a damaged, sad person in general. So aren't you kind of an exception to this kind of quote unquote rule that Oswald and Bill Burr, like I said, Bill Burr doesn't agree with it, but he says this is
I mean, I think there's something to be said for that. I'm not sure if I agree with it either. And as you say, I don't think I'm damaged. I think there might be some people who think I am, but I know damaged people, and I am nowhere close to that on the spectrum of damage. I'm very low. But that doesn't mean that I couldn't use some help with my anger and my rage, and I'm able to channel that into comedy. Yeah, I do think that there's also people who are so damaged that comedy is not really the answer.
Right.
But generally, thinking of a couple of friends of mine, and I'll name them because they talk about this frankly themselves. Dave Merhej is somebody you know well, Asif, a friend of mine, doing incredibly well. And then Steph Tolev, who has an interesting connection to Bill Burr. She is in Old Dad. She has a scene in Old Dads. And Bill Burr actually, I think, co-produced or executive produced her special that's coming out on Netflix in the month of June. She's from Toronto, doing phenomenally well. But she is not well. Like, I will tell you that because she has an album that's called I'm Not Well. Like, she's a maniac. She is actually, I remember a year where she was the belle of the ball at Just for Laughs. She was on all these shows. They're adding her to all these shows. She's had the best year for 2 weeks. She's on every single thing at Just for Laughs that they could put her on. It was exhaustive to watch it from the outside. She comes back home on Sunday, and I see her Sunday night at a weed room. So meaning like a place where they don't serve alcohol, but you can smoke weed indoors. And it's like a sort of clandestine kind of venue on a high that you cannot imagine, achieving the greatest things she could as a Canadian comedian. And then comes to this room full of like pot smokers who don't laugh at the right time. And it's like, kind of a gross, smoky coffee atmosphere in there. And I was like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And she was like, I have a problem. I have to perform. I go, I know, but why here? Why after all that? And part of it is to get this feeling of like normalcy again and just feel like something bad. I need to feel bad. That was too good. And I think my buddy Dave is like that to some degree. And these are self-admitting people with problems. But if you listen to Conan, if you listen to Bill Burr, if you listen to the people who are at the top of their game, there is some damage that results in this compulsion to perform at a rate that other people don't do. I love performing, but I also love my family. And I love a couple of nights in just watching movies with my family, going somewhere with the family. There's a lot of people who just like don't have that, and like performing is everything, and you stop performing and you miss it, and it's a compulsion that's bordering on some kind of disorder.
So I want to talk to you about this Bill Burr quote. So I guess a couple of years ago, he had kind of an existential crisis. He realized he has lots of money. He has a family now that fulfills him. So he's like, what am I doing? Why am I going and doing the stand-up? And then he thought to himself, which I thought was really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard a comedian say this out loud. He said, maybe I should do this not for myself, but for the crowd. So maybe I shouldn't be so selfish. Maybe someone out there is having a bad day, or their home life is bad, or maybe they don't even have a home. Maybe I can just do something to make, like, talk about all these crazy things, go on my rants, but just to have people enjoy an hour of their day or their week or their month. And so what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think I've talked about this with you where I had this experience early on in my comedy. And comedy, when I was starting, was a lot about like, oh, did you hear about this guy got this stage time? He doesn't deserve the weekends. Why is he getting an opening spot on the weekend? He hasn't even done this. And oh, every time that guy goes on stage, he does like 6 minutes. You're supposed to do 5. And he always runs the light. And oh, this guy got this, and just petty loser stuff in Montreal. And for whatever reason, I got the opportunity to perform in Amman, Jordan, at this Amman stand-up comedy festival, the inaugural year of that. Dino Bidala found me from New York. He found me. He's looking for Muslim comedians. I mean, I'm still not that findable. I mean, I don't even know how he found me in 2009, whatever it was. Yeah. And invited me to Amman. And so I went there, and that first day, the mayor is inviting everybody for a lunch. So it's Russell Peters and Maz Jobrani and a number of other comics who are very well known. And the mayor says, just before we eat, I just wanted to say a few words. I wanted to thank you all for bringing joy and laughter to a region that is so desperately in need of it. And I had chills down my spine in that moment. I'm like looking around. I was like, did everyone else feel that? And I don't know if they did because they had already been performing so much in the Middle East. But I felt this thing. And I think I'm very lucky to have felt that at year 3 or 4 of my career. I'm like, why are we worried about this little petty, stupid things? Like, none of that matters. Like, comedy can be something so powerful and amazing, and it can really do something. And I think that really had it's not like I changed things immediately, but that did have a gradual transformative effect. And I always think about that day. And I always think about like how many people I know who are mired in the very petty loser politics of comedy. Mm-hmm. And you realize like nothing is promised to anybody. We're very lucky to do what we do. Bill says that to Terry Gross on Fresh Air. He says, we're very lucky to do a job we enjoy. And Terry says, of course.
Yeah.
I will agree with you because most people don't go into their job loving their job. So you're doing something you love. You're making money. People generally appreciate what you do. The idea of giving back, I think, it's almost a natural progression in my mind. You know, most people who are successful, they will add a mentoring component to their life because you just get to a point where you're like, what is my legacy? What do I want my legacy to be? Angry white ginger who yelled a lot on stage? No, you have children, you have people who have shared their stories and experiences. You realize how lucky you are. And so you mentor other people, which is what basically Bill is doing with my friend Steph Tolo.
Yeah.
And you just help others. You have enough money to help other people produce their projects. If you believe in it, you go, yeah, this looks good. Let's do it. Let's surround you with the best people. So this is like the greatest possible thing that could have happened to Bill Burr in his quote unquote drop dead years.
Well, I just want to end this by talking very briefly about one thing that's not ideal that happened to Bill Burr. God, I don't even want to talk about this. But it was in the news recently. So basically, Bill Burr was on Howie Mandel's podcast. And I guess several months ago, maybe about 6 months ago, Billy Corgan, who is the lead singer of the Smashing Pumpkins, he revealed that at some point, his stepmother, at some point in the past, told him that she basically said, you should check out Bill Burr because he might be one of the children that your father sired on his days being a traveling musician. And in fact, Billy Corgan said that his dad did say, you have a half-brother named Bill who was born around the same time as you. And Billy Corgan and Bill Burr are around the same age. And of course, since that time, if you look on the internet, now they're both bald, they both have beards. There is quite a resemblance between these two guys now, maybe not back in the day. So I guess what happened was Bill Burr was on Howie Mandel's podcast, and then Billy Corgan kind of just showed up as a surprise guest, like they may be related. And Bill Burr, I think, knew about this rumor, obviously, that this was the case, but I think purposely kind of chose not to pursue it any further. And this kind of gets sprung on him. Now, I didn't watch this because it just seemed like cringe isn't the right word. I think I don't know, disrespectful, you need a new word insulting. For it. And so I saw it on YouTube. I didn't click it, but you have.
I've watched it.
And what do you think about this?
I mean, as a fan of Bill Burr's, you cannot watch that and have any respect left for Howie Mandel. This is something he's trying to keep private, because it suggests a certain thing about his mother that he's trying not to make public. And you can't have any respect for Howie Mandel. And Howie has this a shit-eating grin on his face while he's doing it. Like, whoa, wait. And Bill, even more respect for Bill Burr for keeping it together. And Billy Corgan was like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Billy Corgan now feels like he's part of a prank that he didn't sign up for. He goes, he said that you were cool with me coming. I can go. I don't need to be here. I'm sorry. He goes, no, you don't have to go. This is how he's an idiot doing this.
Yeah, and I don't think Bill Burr has any ill will for Billy Corgan. I think
no, why would he? Nice no, of course.
But you have to. God, it's so stupid. It's a big deal. You don't do this on your stupid podcast. Yeah, I have no respect for him. Anyway, sorry to end this section. Such a down.
Well, I'll end it on something else just to freshen that up. And look, we have gone an hour on Bill Burr. As I said, I could talk for an hour on Bill Burr. I think I said 90 minutes. Yeah. But I will say one of the most impressive things about this guy, and again, if you're not familiar with Bill Burr, I really encourage you to go early, watch earlier stuff, and go through the progression of his comedy if you enjoy it, and get to Drop Dead Years, because just watching what he's done over the years and how he's evolved is very impressive. The other thing is he was friends and continues to be friends with some people who are very contentious figures. So he will be on Joe Rogan's podcast often. They go way back. They're both Boston comics. He'll go on. Bill Burr hates Elon Musk and is very vocal about it. Joe Rogan, there's an argument to be made that Joe Rogan is the one who made Elon Musk what he is. But Bill Burr will go on Joe Rogan's podcast and he'll make fun of Joe. He goes, this is what I hate about you. You always do this. You always get, and I just love that. He'll go on Bill Maher's show and he will skewer Bill Maher to his face. And Bill Maher looks very stupid by the end. But Bill will go on those things. But he's just such an interesting person that he still rubs elbows with people he would be at complete disagreements with politically and even sometimes morally, I imagine. And I don't know, it's very different. You just don't see that in society the same way, right? You see people like, I can't talk to my relatives anymore, can't talk to my parents because they supported this and I support this. And in all of that, Bill Burr somehow still finds a way to navigate friendships and disagreements and roasting people when they deserve to be roasted, not giving anybody a free pass either. So there's this honorable side of Bill Burr that also deserves to be mentioned. But yeah, again, I could be here for another, I think, an hour, but I think we'll wrap it up there. Bill Burr, if you don't know him, to be discovered. There's a great article in GQ about how Bill Burr became a voice of the people. There's a great article in the New Yorker about Bill Burr. And of course, the NPR Fresh Air interview with Terry Gross. So his special is called Drop Dead Years. He connects it to the death of a friend of his. His friend quite literally dropped dead. And I always assumed this was related to massive heart attacks and stuff. I think this area is richer than that. At least that's what you're suggesting to me, Asif. So let's talk about this idea of dropping dead. It's a thing that's particularly male, Bill Burr tells me. But I could use a medical opinion too, I suppose. And also it's a thing that's really in those, I think, 49 to 61 years. If those are correct, let's talk about this.
Well, we can talk about that, what happens in older people, but it also happens in younger people too, which we can get to in a second.
Well, younger is the 49 to 61. I'm talking about younger. Is that not considered younger anymore?
Well, we'll talk about it in a second, but you're talking about, again, these older people, again, predominantly male. So yeah, we can talk about that. So one of the things is, Ali, the question for you, which is actually a question for me, is we talk about this sudden cardiac arrest, but the question is cardiac arrest and a heart attack the same thing? If not, tell me the difference.
I can't. I don't like this quiz. Cardiac arrest and a heart attack. No, I couldn't tell you. I would say they're similar, if not synonymous. And obviously that's wrong.
So they're related. How about that? So a heart attack is a lack of blood flow to the heart. Okay. We call that a myocardial infarction. So you've heard that term before, a heart attack. So that's what people mean when they say a heart attack.
Lack of blood flow to the heart.
Correct.
Specifically.
Yes. A cardiac arrest is when the heart stops beating, which is an electrical problem, right? Our heart has an intrinsic rhythm, which is an electrical rhythm. And when that gets disrupted and stops, and so a heart attack, you can think of as a circulation problem, and a cardiac arrest is an electrical problem, but they are linked because you can have a heart attack that obstructs blood flow, which results in cardiac arrest. It can happen during the heart attack, after the heart attack, or even in the weeks that you're recovering from a heart attack. You're susceptible to a cardiac arrest. So a heart attack will increase your risk for a cardiac arrest. And if you pass away because of the cardiac arrest, that's a sudden cardiac death. So the definition is death presumed to be of a cardiac cause that occurs within 1 hour of the onset of cardiac symptoms or within 24 hours of last being seen healthy and alive, because you may not know the exact time of the arrest because it was unwitnessed. Okay, so that's the difference between all these different terms.
Okay, heart attack, sudden cardiac arrest, and sudden cardiac death.
You got it.
All right. Tell me how common this is.
So the estimates are that there are 7 million lives lost a year worldwide to sudden cardiac death. And if you just look at the U.S., it's 300,000 patients per year. And
who's the leader? When you said 7 million, I thought 6.5 million would be in the U.S. Where's this happening? This has nothing to do with diet and lifestyle then, I guess.
Well, the highest number of deaths actually occur in China, followed by India. So population, right? That makes sense. Then Russia, then the US, and then for some reason, Indonesia. So that's the deaths. So, it's not all related to diet. Obviously, it's population as well. But yeah, that's the answer to your question.
Yeah, that's still very impressive in the worst sense of the word number, that it's 7 million worldwide annually. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about the causes of this.
Right. So in the older people, which we were just talking about, and Bill Burr's kind of friends, it's coronary artery disease. So we've talked about that in the podcast before. Atherosclerosis, the buildup of these kind of fatty plaques. Again, not the same plaque that's on your teeth, different kind of plaque in your arteries that can block the artery or dislodge, and that will cause a heart attack. And as we talked about, that can be linked to the sudden cardiac arrest and cardiac death. So coronary artery disease is like 75% of cases in the developed world of sudden cardiac death.
Okay, so those are stats for older people. What about younger people who aren't at risk for coronary disease?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting group. And this is people you've seen. So this could be like, sadly, I think lots of people will know, like young athletes, especially we've seen with basketball players, collegiate athletes, who they're playing sports and then they just drop to the ground, cardiac arrest. Some of them pass away, some of them don't. I've had some patients with that, or patients whose brothers or sisters had that. And so that's obviously very concerning because that's a different cause, right? And some estimates say that 50,000 young athletes to 100,000 die of sudden cardiac deaths each year worldwide. That's a huge amount, right? And you can picture how devastating that is because this comes out of the blue often. There's no warning. It's devastating. So what could be the reasons for that? Some patients will have something called a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is a condition where the walls of the heart become thickened, and that makes it hard to pump blood, which hard to beat regularly, and that can cause cardiac arrest. And that can be genetic. There's also another genetic kind of form of rhythm problem called long QT syndrome, which is basically a problem with the rhythm of your heart. Sometimes you're not born with it, but it can be caused by medications or other health conditions. And that will cause people to just have fast, abnormal heartbeats for no reason. And it can lead to sudden death. Sometimes you just pass out, but sometimes it can lead to death. There's other rhythm problems, which I won't get into. You can also be born with a congenital heart disease, which can put you at risk of that. But then usually that gets diagnosed either before babies are born or shortly after they're born. But sometimes it can be a forceful hit to the chest, okay? It's called commotio cordis, and that occurs in athletes who are hit hard in the chest, either by another player or some sort of sports equipment. So it doesn't damage the heart. It's not like you bruise the heart, but it will disrupt the electrical signaling. And that hit has to occur at a specific time in the rhythm of the heart for that to occur. So obviously it's very rare, but you've heard of like boxers and heart punches, and some of those stories are probably more mythologized, but that's another possibility as well. So all these things, usually it's a genetic problem. So if a young person has a sudden cardiac death, especially when playing sports, then that will be investigated usually with genetic testing. And hopefully if it's an episode where they had a sudden cardiac arrest but didn't die, then they would be investigated as well.
I should also mention this because I went on a little bit of a deep dive and felt kind of creepy about it, but Bill Burr dedicates Drop Dead Years, it says in loving memory of Marcus Geisen or Geisen. Apparently, from what I saw, that's not the friend of his who died that he tells the story about. Marcus did die, but Marcus was born in 1997. He was a younger guy. When I was, interested in his age and how he died in a car crash with his newlywed bride in the car as well. She didn't die. It's a terrible story. It's a beautiful story of passengers trying to turn over the car and resuscitate him too. It's very interesting. And I found all this on Bill Burr's wife's Instagram. Nia has you might notice that Bill dedicated it to this guy. He was taking photos of us on this beautiful day, and he did, yeah. So it's not connected. So I'm basically presenting a non-story here, but I'm saving others from maybe doing the investigation on who this person was, Bill Burr's friend who passed away.
Yeah, quite a digression there, but that's okay.
Quite a digression. Well, what can you do about this if you're at risk?
Right.
especially if it's genetic. What are your options here?
So, I mean, and a similar worry is like for parents, coaches, how do you know if someone's at risk of this, right? It's quite scary to think about. So the problem is sometimes it can occur without warning. So it can just happen, which is the most frightening. But you need to be checked out if you have syncope, which is fainting, right? And especially if it can't be explained or it occurs when you're exercising. So syncope, passing out when you're exercising, is very unusual. And that needs to be...
Syncope is the medical term for fainting?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, sometimes we say fainting, that's actually something called vasovagal syncope. That's the fainting that, oh my gosh, I just got a blood test done, or I saw something really scary, or I've been out all day, I have been drinking water a lot, and you're dehydrated, and then you pass out. That's also when people stand up really quickly after sitting down, and you see some lights in your vision and you feel a bit lightheaded, and then you pass out. That's a normal kind of fainting. We call that vasovagal syncope. But syncope could also be like a cardiac syncope, which is what we're worried about here. Obviously, if kids are getting shortness of breath or chest pain with exercise, it could just be asthma, right, which is pretty common, but it may not be. So they need to be checked out by your doctor. And then, of course, if you have a family history of a sudden cardiac death, especially in a young person, then that needs to be investigated. And again, like I said, I've had some patients who have a sibling who passed away from sudden cardiac death, and all the siblings have to be investigated for a possible genetic cause and have heart rate tracings and things like that. But your question was, can you prevent what's going on? I mean, if they know you're at risk and they've done the test and they find you have like the cardiomyopathy or something like that, they might say you shouldn't play competitive sports. That might be a recommendation. But it depends on the condition. They may consider medicine to help regulate your heartbeat, or surgery. So for example, and we've talked about this before, we can get an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, an ICD, inserted into your chest. We talked about that on a previous episode when we talked about pacemakers, and that will check the heart's rhythm, and if a change occurs, it delivers a shock to the heart. So those are probably the only ways.
So let's talk, as we always do, about the prognosis for this.
So it's difficult because if people have a cardiac arrest outside of hospital, only 20% of those patients survive till the discharge of their hospital stay. So pretty concerning. So 80% do not, in other words. It depends a bit about what's going on. So one of the ways to decrease this risk of death from a sudden cardiac arrest is by having these automatic external defibrillators throughout communities and training people how to use them. So that's why you'll see these in schools, in gyms, pools, right? We'll have these defibrillators because that ends up helping people. And so everybody knowing how to do CPR and hopefully also learning how to use one of those defibrillators. So we talked about this before, but a defibrillator won't work in every circumstance. You need to have a specific heart rhythm abnormality. One is called VF, or ventricular fibrillation. One is called ventricular tachycardia, or VT or VTAC. These are what we call shockable rhythms. But the defibrillator, it does everything, right? You put on the leads and it reads the heart rate and it decides whether to shock or not. So you don't have to do any interpretation. It just tells you, it will just do it on your own. But some data suggests that if people had a defibrillator given or a CPR, that their survival 1 month after the episode can double if they get those treatments and interventions at the time. Another study looked at if you use an automated defibrillator, the time to defibrillation went from 11 minutes to 4 minutes. And so, because obviously you don't have to wait for the ambulance, right? It can just be given immediately. But more importantly, the neurologically intact survival, right? Just because you give something 6 minutes earlier goes from 14.3% to 49.6%. So in other words, the vast majority of patients not neurologically normal, but goes to 50% are just because they got 6. And you think that's only 6 minutes, but that's 6 minutes with your brain not receiving any blood flow, because when your heart stops, there's no oxygen or blood flow to your brain, right? So
I have a friend who does a comedy festival in a small town, a small community in Newfoundland. No hospital there. Closest hospital is about an hour away. You'd have to go by ferry
Oh my
or
gosh.
helicopter. And he said, we've really considered buying a place here, someplace where we come here in the summers for a bit and eventually we settle down. But I remember him telling me something that I'm thinking of right now, where he was like, the only thing about this place is if you have some health related incident, you're dying here. This is where it's over. And I was like, that's grim. He goes, you tell me how quickly you could get to a hospital from this place. And I thought of my dad who needed, ambulance care a bunch of times. And I was like, oh yeah. Never thought about that. Never thought about that.
Well, there's a couple options. One is they could buy a helicopter or something like that. That's one option.
There you go.
Then,
yeah. His wife could go back to school, become a nurse.
That's right.
That's a real,
or he could maybe
realizable
get
option.
at least an external defibrillator. They probably already have those there, I would assume.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an issue. I mean, I have lots of patients who live up in northern Canada who fly down here to see me, and they don't have a lot of resources out there, And so, yeah, it's definitely a concern.
Okay, so just as we wrap up, let's talk about what the average person can do, should do when they see somebody going through an episode that might be one of these that you've listed.
Yeah,
here.
and so, again, people faint all the time. Fainting, you feel lightheaded, you pass out, and then usually people respond within like a few seconds, right? And then they're like a bit disoriented, and that's normal, right? But we're talking they fall down to the ground, especially during exercise, and they're just unconscious, right? You can't wake them up.
Yeah.
This is probably because their heart has stopped or there's some sort of dysfunction, and then they're not waking up. So obviously you check for responsiveness because you want to see if you can wake them up. Is it just a fainting kind of spell? Then again, this stuff is like basic first aid, but you call for help, so you get help, and you need to call 911 immediately, obviously. Then, again, everyone should be trained in basic CPR. I think that's a standard. Anybody, we say that all parents should be, but really everybody should be, because this could happen to anybody. We all work or live with other people, right? Or walk in our community. So then you start CPR until the ambulance arrives. If an automated external defibrillator is available, you get it and apply it. Again, it tells you how to do everything. So you don't have just follow the instructions. And if somebody else is there, the reason to call for help is because one person can start CPR, the other person can call 911 and get the automatic external defibrillator. Again, if you're at a pool or a gym, the staff are usually trained in how to do this and administer these things. But if not, if you're by yourself, then again, one person can go do those things.
So another case where laughter is simply not the best medicine.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I would
CPR
say
training.
do something instead of laughing. Yeah, don't do that.
Not laughing at them, but telling jokes to make them laugh in their unconscious states. Probably not super useful. Okay, folks, get that CPR training. And even though laughter is not the best medicine, get some Bill Burr in you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
Yeah.
Reach out to us. Let us know what you guys thought about this episode about Bill Burr. Have you seen his recent comedy special? And this topic of sudden cardiac death. Obviously, it's a serious topic, as Ollie was saying, but reach out to us. Let us know. drvcomedian@gmail.com, Dr. V Comedian on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky. We're everywhere. Ollie, what do you got going on in June 2025?
Yeah, I'll be pretty local to Toronto, doing shows around Toronto. Last year, you may recall, Asif, I had a hernia surgery that took me out for half the summer. So it wasn't super enjoyable. There was no sort of swimming or activities at the park for the entire month of August. And the summer before that, I was away for a big part of it. The summer before that, this is a summer that I'll be pretty local to Toronto, and I am just absolutely fine with that. Now, those things sometimes change. I say that and then it changes. But I am going to Cape Breton in August. Laugh Out Loud is doing CBC's Laugh Out Loud. In case people don't, if this is your first episode, I host a show called Laugh Out Loud on CBC Radio, and we do live tapings across the country. So going to Cape Breton for the first time. You ever been?
Never been. And again, for people who don't know, that's on the East Coast
tell you about it.
Canada. Very nice place, apparently. Never been, but
I'm about to tell you all about it.
Great. Can't wait for that. Yeah. But remember that although I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. Medical issues we talk about are for your interest and information only, but they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.